Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Real Estate Mogul MD. My name is Bob Bosick. I'm a retired executive, and I have the privilege of speaking with medical professionals, high-income earners, and investors. We're here today to share the real-world journeys along with the to-dos, and more importantly, the not-to-dos. I'm excited today that we have with us Dr. Andrew Kowalski. He's had the time carved out of his schedule to spend with us this morning, and we're very, very appreciative. Born and raised, as I understand, and continues to live in the Chicago area. And I just wanted to welcome you, Andrew, and say good morning.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're very, very welcome. So I thought we would start for our listeners trying to maybe hear a little bit about your medical journey. When did you decide you were going to go to medical school?
Oh, that's a funny story. So when did I decide, or when did my parents decide?
Yeah. Are they doctors also, or no?
No. Actually, my mom was an accountant in Eastern Europe during the whole communist regime bit, and she worked for the government. So it was interesting. She ended up getting a visa, which is completely unheard of, to come to the States, and she ended up staying. So that's how that worked out.
Where in Eastern Europe was she?
So she was in Poland, so heavily influenced by the Russian occupation and all that. But so I have my own set of horror stories. That's for a later conversation.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. It was interesting how things just kind of fell into place for her, for my dad, and I guess here I am.
Yeah, my family's origins are from over there as well. I remember talking to my great grandfather, and I would say, "So where are we from?" And with a thick accent, he'd say, "I said, are we from Czechoslovakia?" And he would go, "No, Czechoslovakia, Slovakia." Right? And this was, after World War II, but before the fall of the wall, and so Slovakia had essentially disappeared, but. Surprisingly, I think the president, my great grandfather's name was Duda, and I think the president of Poland right now is named Duda. So, yeah. if I have that correct,
I believe you do. Yes.
All right, very good. So she came over. She was an accountant. She worked back for the old Eastern Bloc set of countries, specifically Poland, and so she came over, migrated, and she landed in Chicago.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And is this where she met your father?
Correct.
Okay. Very good. And so when did you know you wanted to go be a doctor?
I think it all started when I was younger too. I mean, they would buy me those Fisher-Price doctor sets and things like that. And I was always fascinated about how things worked and how medicine makes you feel better. I think most people's stories are the same. Then my path kind of took a turn when I was in college. I really connected with an advisor who ended up being my mentor, and his specialty was entomology. So he would go to Costa Rica, and I don't even know if he was so proud of it too. He discovered 30 different species of weevils. I didn't even know what a weevil was.
Yes, please do explain for the listeners just real quick.
Yeah, it's basically a little tiny beetle that has a pseudo elephant trunk. That's it. It's a grain eater, but they're apparently very rampant around farms and even just basic domestic gardens. But his claim to fame is he identified a whole bunch of new ones, and he was super proud of it. And
wow.
So we were talking, and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I was like, "Oh, I don't know, blah, blah, blah." And he asked me if I wanted to get into a project, and I always like spiders. And if you see the other side of my office, it's all Spider-Man.
Okay.
That's kind of my childhood superhero. But So I did this whole project on spiders, and we did this great, map of Chicago, and we went to, it was 13 different garages, and we collected, it was 156 different spiders that we had in all these little alcohol jars. And he set me up with an office at the Field Museum. So that was really cool. So I got to go behind the scenes and do all that, and it was great. And I distinctly remember I was sitting there with my microscope, identifying everything. And I picked my head up and I looked around. I was the only one in the lab. And I walked out into the hallway and I'm the only one in the hallway. And I'm like, oh my God, I am yearning for human contact. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then I realized that it wasn't for me. And when I talked to, I call him an uncle. He was a physician. He's a cardiologist. And he's like, yeah, medical school is so much fun. It's different every day, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you know what? That does sound appealing, and I was a bio major and, you had your little dabble in that. And I remember talking to my advisor then, and I was like, listen, I think I want to go to med school instead of getting a PhD. And he looked at me and he handed me this bug on a pin. And I'm looking at it. He was like, identify that for me. And I was like, okay. And I did. And he's like, so why on earth would you waste your talent telling people they have sore throats all day? And I'm like, well, it's kind of something I want to do.
It's my interest.
So he told me to sit on it for a week, and I did. And I told him I still wanted to do it. So begrudgingly, he wrote me a letter, and that's where my journey began.
Where'd you go to med school?
So at the time, I was off schedule, and I was already halfway through. I didn't quite was doing a master's yet in biology, but I was kind of taking master's courses. So I would have had to wait another year. So I ended up doing a Caribbean bit. So I went to St. George's in Grenada. I just didn't want to wait an extra year.
Sure.
I ended up doing an MPH with it, and that ended up working to my advantage. I got a great education. I ended up coming back to Chicago. I was a resident.
Worst places to go to med school also.
Oh, it was beautiful too. Can't complain there. But it was nice. I did all my clinicals at the University of Medicine and Dentistry of New Jersey, which is now Rutgers.
Okay.
So that was great. I had great exposure there. And then I did my residency at University of Illinois, Chicago. I did a chief residency. And then I went to Northwestern for nephrology, and I did a chief fellowship there. And then I signed and became an attending. And the full circle, the hospital that I'm currently at is the hospital that I started volunteering at and I was born in.
Wow.
And it wasn't even a plan. Yeah, it wasn't a plan at all. And when I was interviewing for my position, I thought that the group wanted to send me down to the South Side because they were, rebuilding and trying to grow that practice. And I guess my dad's nephrologist was retiring and they needed someone to fill a spot. So I didn't even realize that's what it was for. And lo and behold.
What were some of the challenges? Did you experience any challenges going to medical school in the Caribbean versus being in the mainland here?
I really haven't.
The pathway to residency, nothing is different.
Nothing, I think we just I'm sure there is. I went to, St. George's is, frequently labeled as the Harvard of the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it has to do, they do have, copious amounts of funds that they can spend to make sure that their students get excellent rotations and exposure and so forth. So my transition to that whole bit was seamless. After the initial 2 years of book work, all my clinicals were hand in hand with, med students from New Jersey. We did everything together. We took the exact same exams. We were, all our rotations were the same. It was no different.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So you've gotten, but from that experience, you've gotten very involved, as I understand in our discussions earlier, that you've gotten very involved with foreign medical students and
yes.
And helping assist them transition from foreign countries. Is that correct?
Correct.
Tell me how you got involved with that and why do you do that?
So, I guess by definition, I'm considered an international grad, even though I think, that's in air quotes because, I'm a U.S. citizen and all that
Sure.
stuff. But, I guess seeing how some of my colleagues at the time, they went to med school and maybe took some of it for granted and then not wanting to fill in certain shoes. There's, you can argue if there is a shortage of doctors. Some folks say yes, some folks say no. There is a definite shortage in rural areas like that we know of for sure. I think it's pretty saturated in the cities and suburbs. And I think that's where the data gets skewed depending what you look at.
Right.
But a lot of like my colleagues, they went to med school because their parents were doctors, or they had, a pedigree to fill, or they had an opportunity because there was an endowment and so forth. And they weren't really into it for what it was worth. Some of them didn't even go to residency. They went and started working for corporate America. One went into real estate. And I'm like, well, that's, you go through all this schooling to do absolutely nothing in medicine. Some of them went to work for biotech companies, and, there's a lot of positions that go unfilled, training positions, and they're searching for people. And then you have these individuals coming from other countries. And when you look at the comparison, their schools are, some of them are 300, 400, 500 years old. They've been training doctors for, ages, and, they do excellent. Like, you look at their scores and they're off the charts, so they have the brains for it, and they really want to, come to the U.S. for whatever reason. The ones that I've had the opportunity to work with, just want to come just to share, an experience that they had, or share the love of medicine. And they have some amazing stories. Like, they would talk about, all these cultural differences in their home country, and all the adversities that their family had to go through, and how their mother was a physician and being a woman, and culturally how that played out, but how, she just worked hard and became this like person that everyone went to. Or how I had this one student who was with me who was telling me how, she went to medicine because, her family wanted to. It wasn't something she wanted to do. And her father was a physician, and her father passed suddenly. And the outpouring of love that she saw from the community, and like what he did for the community, she's like, it changed her entire perspective. It went from, I'm going to med school because my family wants to, but now it's like, I want to do that for everyone. I want to change their lives. And, you hear enough of those stories and you're like, wow, it's amazing. If we can get these people here with that kind of passion, imagine what we can do. You hear these horror stories, people going to doctors, and it's like, oh, they never looked at me, or they had their back turned towards me, or they never paid attention to what I had to say. And I'm like, well, these are the people that you want then. They're the ones that want to do this. Like, they want to solve your problems.
I was talking to a physician a couple of weeks ago. She's, 20 years now. She's out of Pennsylvania. And I said, boy, you got started pretty quick out of residency and started your own practice. She says, I literally quit after 4 years of working with these three guys. This was in 2001. They were about 65. They were old school in their mentality. And when I first got there, the doctor, one of the founders, calls her into the office. He says, grab a piece of paper or the newspaper and have a sit. And she goes, well, we got patients out there. He goes, I know that, but if you make them wait for 45 minutes, it creates a sense of need that, there's that we're exclusive or something along those lines. And she's like, where does this thinking come from? And she said, like, after 3, 4, 5 years, she just said, literally in the middle of the day, I got to go, because, they weren't focused on the patient. They weren't, satisfying what their needs were. And it was just, it made her feel dirty. What the thought processes and the way they were going about it. How long ago did you start this project?
It kind of just fell into my lap. I think probably about 4, maybe 5 years ago. It was more of, some of the residents that I work with was like, hey, my friend needs to, a lot of, just some background, a lot of international schools, just to qualify for residency, need to have some sort of exposure to the system. Uh-huh. So it's either hands-on or more of an observership, kind of like a shadowing experience, right? Just to say that they are familiar with it. So a couple of the residents were like, hey, I have a friend back home, graduated with me, but they need a couple more hours, or they need one more rotation. Would you be willing to, work with them just so, they can have that exposure? And I was like, yeah, why not?
And they come to you.
Yes. And, we had opportunities to go through the hospital, clinic, and it was amazing because it ended up being like I transitioned from doing a favor for a few people to thoroughly enjoying the people that I meet. And I ended up learning so much about other cultures and how things are done in other countries. And I think that helped me relate better to my patients. Even like when we talk about, what you could say, could not say, certain even dietary restrictions. I mean, as a nephrologist, we work a lot with electrolyte abnormalities and blood pressure issues and so forth. And diet plays a huge role in that. And, just knowing the cultural background of what they cannot do. And it was great.
Do you see any, if they are from far away countries, do you see any consistency on a technical level where there's challenges for them that they need to get caught up?
In terms of the toys, and I say that in air quote, yes. So medical knowledge wise, phenomenal.
Not medical knowledge wise.
Yeah. So it's more of what we have available to us. So a lot of them, so I do procedures also. So that's part of, what I do.
Right.
And I would use ultrasounds and so forth. And a lot of times, whenever I would, use any sort of, tech equipment, a lot of them are like, wow, we would just, have to know the, basic anatomy and landmarks and use a stethoscope to figure things out. And who uses a CT scan? We had to actually figure out which arm moves, what doesn't move.
They're old school.
That's how we found the
doctors, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so it was amazing when talking to them because I actually relearned a lot of this stuff that you had to learn in med school. So that was fun. But yeah, from a knowledge perspective, it's all there.
I would think that they would. I thought the same thing, that maybe the equipment might not necessarily be available to them, but their skill sets would be almost akin to a field doctor in the military, right? Where you're out there and stuff's coming at you and you don't have a lot of stuff. You've got to get them together to move them on to someplace else. That's kind of in my mind's eye what I was wondering. But I would think that their actual intuitive skill sets would be pretty good in the absence of having some of the equipment that we have.
100% correct. I mean, what they can MacGyver is amazing. Right?
Yeah, creative, real creative, and
very
drawing connections and figuring it out. Very interesting. So the biggest challenge that they face is probably just becoming more familiar with the equipment that's available to them here that they don't necessarily have access to where they're coming from.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's kind of like an onion. So it's multi-leveled. I mean, the other big hurdle is, getting into the system, right? Is, getting the interviews, getting into the system and so forth.
The sponsorship, if you will.
Exactly. And a lot of that is, there's a lot of misinformation out there for them. There's a lot of, I could say self-made gurus, if you want to use that term, that offer all this insight on how to, navigate the system to set yourself up for success. But much of the information is either old or false. And they come to the plate with, this amazing knowledge, but they're falling short in terms of what they need to actually make it through the entire, interview process, hurdles. I mean, it's a marathon. It's a multi-month event just to get a position in training here.
How long have you been out of residency?
So residency would have been 2015. Fellowship was 2018.
Gotcha. If you could go back in time and tell your earlier self, your younger version of yourself in college, what would you, knowing what you know now, tell yourself? What was the learning that you have over that period of time?
I would have most likely pushed for medicine sooner. I love what I do. I have so much fun. I always joke that, I have ADD and I just can't focus on anything, which is partially true, but I love it because every day it's never the same thing. Even if it's the same quote unquote condition or disease that you're working with, it's still not. It's always new. So it's exciting because you never know what you're going to stumble across, or you never know what you're going to find. Yeah, it is. Even something that could be run of the mill, and you get in there and you're like, whoa, this is out of left field.
Right.
And it's great.
Who is maybe someone that the listeners might not know, but they should know?
Me, no.
Yeah.
Regarding what exactly, in terms of
anything that you have really taken to heart, somebody that you really, someone that really made an impression upon you, had an impact on you, that is available, or people could have access to, something you read, an author, anything, any belief that has shaped you?
That is a very good question. And I'd have to say it's not one person, book, event, or talk. It's a culmination of everything put together. Okay. What I would say, though, is don't be afraid to reach out to somebody if you want to pick their brain or you want them to be a mentor.
Yep.
What I have been surprised by over and over again is the willingness of people that you think are on a pedestal and they're untouchable, but they're really not. And right. They're more than happy to pull you up on that pedestal with them.
That is a great piece of advice. That is one that that is not something, it resonates with me, because I remember as a young executive, you get around ultimately where I ended up, which was the C-suite. But when you're first maybe a division president, executive vice president, you're starting to be exposed to people on the board and things of that nature, and you're like, man, there's a million questions I have, but they don't want to answer my questions. All it will do is highlight what I don't know, right? That I should know. You have all these insecurities, and then you get there and you realize, everybody is exactly as they were almost, in college. And 100%. We were all helpful to others in wanting to give back or to mentor. And then you get involved as, in mentoring people and having them come in on a quarterly basis. And it's a kick. It's terrific to do.
It is. It really is. I'm still surprised to this day, but I even remember when I was a fellow and we would, walk around the hospital, and, the attending I was with would like chat up some doc, and, we would just kind of go back and forth, and just laugh and joke and all that.
Yeah.
And we'd like walk away, and he was like, "Oh, you know who that was?" And I was like, no clue. He's like, "Oh, well, the reason why we use Lipitor is because of him." And I'm like, "What?" Like that's, and it was like the coolest guy in the world. And,
right. Very, very grounded and down to earth.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
It's amazing.
Is true. Yeah,
it really is. And I think imposter syndrome is a real thing. And I think we all suffer from it to some degree.
Yep.
And I mean, that's a hurdle that everyone has to battle, but it's, you are where you are for a reason. And it's because of the hard work you put in, and don't negate it. And I think other people will recognize that and will definitely give you that boost if you ask.
Without question. Shifting gears with all that you've been involved with, how are you setting yourself up in the future? Are you investing? Are there things that you're doing outside of medicine to secure your financial future? Do you do certain things?
I do. I've made I guess everything's learning, right? You make a couple of bad mistakes, I think everyone around my age obviously has heard of crypto or have dabbled in, crypto has done some beautiful things for me. It's also done some terrible things for me.
Yep.
But what I've noticed for me is, if you do what you like and you do what you're passionate about, you're going to make out on top. So part of what I started doing recently is, so last year I had about 70 international students round with me throughout the year, which is a lot. I mean, sometimes I'd have, 10 with me a month, and trying to navigate that is a headache.
And they're just shadowing you.
Just shadowing, yeah. And of course, you can't have all of them with you all the time. You had to set up schedules and then trying to teach them and, share just any sort of knowledge, whether it's medicine, whether it's, how to navigate the system. It's tricky.
So the hospital has been completely supportive and has no objections.
Yes and no. Our hospital is bought out by a bigger institution, which tends to kind of set up their own rules. So that made it a little bit tricky, but being a private practitioner, it makes it easier for me to bring the students into like our own centers, like our own outpatient centers and surgical centers. So they get a ton of exposure. So they're not lacking there. But, at the end, when, finishing writing all these letters of recommendation and everything, you do get burned out, and I can't do that anymore because I've noticed that I'd have to balance family, work, and then this was like a second job.
Right.
So what I started doing is I started putting together online courses on how to navigate the system, meaning like how to obtain observership positions, how to ask for letters of recommendation, certain keywords you need to use when you write your letters.
Where should people find this? Where could people access that information?
So it's my website is hackthematch.com.
Okay.
And I have it broken down into a couple of different packages where you can just do the videos. Then you can do, packages involving just how to set up your CV and write your personal statements, how to, navigate the interview portion of it and what to say, what not to say. There's a lot of misinformation about that. And then I also offer some coaching as well. So it just depends how involved you want to get with it.
And tell the listeners one more time where they could find that.
So it's www.hackthematch, hackthematch.com.
Terrific. Okay. And were you a typical medical student that exited out with $200,000 or $250,000 of student debt? And if so,
my friend.
And have you managed out of that yet?
No, not yet. I think, now that we had that freeze because of COVID, right. I think I topped out after all the, once you adjust for the interest, I think I'm somewhere around 375, if I'm not mistaken. So
does it weigh heavy on you, or does it?
It does. Like I periodically forget about it. And then all of a sudden, every month you get a little notification. You're like, oh,
you get reminded.
Yes. Yes. It is not fun.
No, it's not. I work with, have an affiliate agreement with a group called Doc to Doc Lending. Have you ever heard of them?
No.
Yeah, they're interesting. They're a group of physicians, and they do unsecured loans, doc to doc lending, where they help physicians specifically trying to take care of some of that loan and the interest rates on them, or opening a practice, or someone needs a piece of equipment or something along those lines. But they're an interesting, smart group of doctors that we work with, and they do some interesting stuff. If you're ever thinking about creative ways to get out from underneath that, you might want to look them up. And it's DOC, the number 2, Doc to Doc Lending.
Oh, I definitely will.
Yeah, they're interesting. All right. Well, I have wrapped up about 30 minutes of your time, but I just want to tell you how much I appreciate talking with you, hearing your journey. And it's so nice to hear how people give back in different ways, and you helping out foreign physicians trying to get into the country and taking that upon yourself to share and to give back is just, it's a wonderful story, and it's nice to hear. As I've shared with you, I've known a couple of people that have done foreign medical school, and it was a journey for them. It was a difficult process. There were extra steps at that time that they had to go through, and they would have absolutely appreciated some mentoring and some sponsorship by someone like yourself. And it's just very nice to hear that you do that kind of work and are giving back that way.
Well, thank you. That was very kind.
All right. Well, nice having you today, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.